Offsides, offsides, offsides. Hello, Deadlock player. Do you find yourself constantly getting jumped with no one there to help you? Maybe you have the technical skill to play a handful of characters but still feel you don't know where to be around the map at any given time. Well then, you may be suffering from a severe case of walking past the creep wave. You may retort and say it was for a good cause, that he was one shot, I wasn't looking at the map, anything else you can drum up. And to that, all I gotta say is, Deadlock again. Today we're going to be talking about the line of scrimmage, an imaginary line that is never visually present in the game, but you should almost always be respecting. Unless of course you enjoy dying over and over again. Do you enjoy dying over and over again? That's what I thought. So, in order to avoid as many unnecessary deaths as possible, let's take a little history lesson on football, or as you non-Americans like to call, American football. To be honest, I don't give a damn about this game. It's just the only sport I know where a physical line of scrimmage is drawn, or at least represented in some capacity. So it serves as a good point to learn the concept as a whole. A quick Google search gives you this definition. The line of scrimmage is an imaginary sideline to sideline line in American football, marking the ball's spot at the start of each play, separating the offense and defense, with rules dictating player positioning. 7 on the line, with eligible receivers on the ends, and prohibiting movement until the ball is snapped, creating the fundamental boundary for the play and establishing a neutral zone for the initial confrontation. Like I said, I don't claim to know the rules past this point. There's a ball, you move it up the field, there's an end zone, you score some points, whatever. But the line of scrimmage is what we can use and borrow from the sport to better understand its usage in Deadlock. In contrast to football, in Deadlock there are no fouls. The game won't stop because you cross this line prematurely. Instead, you're incentivized to stay on your side of the line for fear of being jumped by the enemy team. See, the line of scrimmage essentially delineates control of the map. It's defined by the collective state of each of the lanes and where the creeps are crashing. It also defines how bold you and your team can be with movement around the map. At minute 1, the creeps crash in the dead center of the lane, in all 3 lanes, and create what's known as a deadlock. It's from here on that things start to get interesting, and the line ceases to be a line and more so an amorphous concept that, like I said, you should be respecting. Depending on the state of the game, how many objectives up, and where the waves are crashing in each of the line can be different in all 3 lanes. This means that the overall line of scrimmage becomes less so that straight line and more so a piece of pasta slapped onto the map. It can take the shape of a normal distribution, its inverse, or any combination in between. Again, all based on where the creep waves are crashing. Let's create a visual example for you visual learners out there. Not a thing, by the way. Here we have the Deadlock map. On the top half, you have the enemy's territory, and on the bottom, you have a mirrored duplicate for your territory. Resources like camps, boxes, sinner sacrifices spawn in mirrored fashion on each side, ensuring that each team has the exact same amount to play with. However, once that line of scrimmage starts to take shape and bends and breaks from its traditional start point, these resources and the territories they lie within start to change sides. Not in a literal sense, but in a Deadlock game theory sense. If your creep wave in the left lane is all the way pushed up to their walker, and your middle lane is still at that midpoint, then by virtue of this pressure created by the creep wave, you can now more easily access those resources on their side of the map. The opposite is of course true on your side. If you do have those creeps all the way up to their walker, but on your right side of the map, your walker is being sieged, now all those resources on the right side can now be easily accessed by the enemy team. Although you might like to access those resources, even though they're on your starting side of the map, because the creep wave is under your walker, you are necessitated to go and clear that wave first, allowing time for the enemy team to steal up all those resources. Again, just because technically it's on your side of the map, the line of scrimmage is so far up that you crossing it, even though you're still on your side of the map, can be a detriment and lead to death. While you're handling that creep wave, in the interim, the enemy team is sucking up every little less soul left on your side, or at least they should be. And that's where a lot of newer players, and even more experienced ones in lower lobbies, start to throw their games without even realizing. Because the moment you stop ignoring where your creep wave is crashing is the moment you stop playing Deadlock strategically and you start playing it emotionally. You start chasing kills, you start rotating to fights that might be breaking out, even though they're gonna be ending by the time you get there, and you start walking into areas that technically are on your side of the map, however practically are no longer under your control. And if you're playing against any form of competent team, they know this and will exploit it. They see your creep wave shoved under your own walker, they see nobody responding. What does this tell them? Free pressure, free farm, and of course, free picks. So let's tighten up this concept, because the line of scrimmage isn't just that crash point where the creeps meet in lane. It is in fact the furthest point where your team can operate in a controlled manner. It's the boundary of your information network. And most importantly, it indicates who has tempo on the map. This is all because creeps aren't just there to be cannon fodder, but are in fact the unsung hero of Deadlock, as I've described before. They give vision, they force reactions, and they anchor player positioning throughout the map. If your creeps are forward, the enemy has to answer. If their creeps are forward, your team has to answer. And if nobody answers, well, objectives disappear quite quickly. Alright, so let's talk about that classic mistake we've all made before. You spawn in after dying, you take a half-second look at the map, and you see a fight breaking out. And immediately your brain goes, ah yes, violence. I need to go there. Meanwhile, you have an entire wave crashing under your walkers. You have zero priority in the lane, and your vision is entirely blocked because of it. You start to get some distance out in the map, and the fog of war sets in, and you're walking into a horror movie as the extra. That's how you end up getting jumped so consistently. Not because your mechanics are bad, not because your aim is poor, but because strategically, you were offsides. Alright, so this is the big mental shift I want you to make. You don't control space because you walked there. You control space because the lane prio gave you that space. Think of creeps like the legal paperwork. No paperwork, you're squatting. And instead of an eviction notice, what you get in the mail is a 3-man collapse. So here is where the pasta analogy comes back. The line of scrimmage isn't static. It stretches, it compresses, and it snaps back into position. Let's say you shove left lane hard, mid is neutral, and your right lane is being pushed into your walker. What happens? This in essence means you can play aggressively on the left side of the map, you should play very neutral in that mid side of the map, and you must stabilize that right side of the map before trying anything at all. Because if you ignore that right lane, the enemy team doesn't just get that farm. They get lane priority, objective pressure, flank angles, and usually a numbers advantage somewhere else on the map. This is how games can snowball without people understanding exactly why. So here are some hard and fast rules that I feel you can use to better gain an understanding of where to be when. Rule 1. If your walker is under threat, nothing else matters. Kills, sinner sacrifices, boxes, farm, all come secondary. Rule number 2. Don't cross the creep wave. If you're there alone, you barely have ads, and no teammate is nearby, you probably shouldn't be pushing past that wave. Rule number 3. Push the wave before rotating. If you leave the lane there and it ends up pushing while you're rotating, then the rotate that you've just made to get the kill, even if you get the kill, is all moot because you now have to go back to your walker to clear up the wave. A pushed wave buys time, an ignored wave creates emergencies. And finally, rule number 4. Map pressure beats heroics. Highlight clips are all fun and dandy, but map control and lane prio wins more games than the highlight clips. And of course, what's the point in having rules if you can't break a couple in the process? So once you understand these 4 fundamental concepts, you can uniquely and smartly bend and break them to your advantage. This is where good and even fantastic players become tempo-setting terminators on the map. Some examples of breaking these rules are coordinated ganks when enemies are shoving the wave, vision plays when you understand where enemies are, fast objective trades, and split pressure pushes. But notice something, these aren't random, they're calculated plays and intentional breaking of those rules I just described. It's a big difference from haphazardly walking around the map and trying to win that next fight. So let's bring it all together. The next time you die from a gank, before you go off and blame your teammates, your own aim, technical skill, or the Deadlock gods themselves, Yoshi, praise be unto thee, ask yourself this one question. Where was the line of scrimmage? And more importantly, why were you past it? Because 9 times out of 10, the answer explains everything. Deadlock isn't just a shooter, it's not just a MOBA, but in fact, it's a territory game that blends both together fantastically. And the creeps, they are the unsung heroes and frontline diplomats that your team relies upon. Respect them or enjoy that 60-second respawn timer. So take what you've learned in this video, get back into the cursed apple, praise be unto Yoshi, and nothing else for me to do but Deadlock out.